This is 20 Minutes of Impact from the United States Energy Association Power Sector Podcast. I'm Herman K. Trabish. I've covered the power sector since 2006, and I currently report for Utility Dive. On today's podcast, my guest is Stephen Lanzisera, Chief Technical Officer with smart device aggregator Renew Home. We're going to talk about the potentially market-moving findings in Renew Home's just released white paper, Scaling Residential Demand Response by Prioritizing Comfort, evidence from 25 million energy shifts. Stephen's over 25-year career included time as a research scientist at Lawrence Berkeley National Labs, a co-founder of technology leader Whisker Labs, and a senior engineering manager at Google. He became Renew Home's Chief Technology Officer in July after time as its VP of Engineering and Chief Software Architect. Stephen, before we get into the very important but pretty wonky statistics in your new white paper, can you give us a high-level overview in everyday terms of what the study's key takeaways are? And can you begin by explaining what an energy shift that prioritizes comfort is and why that's so important?
Yeah, of course. First, I want to say thanks for having me on, Herman, and I'm really looking forward to this conversation. The white paper that you mentioned is about residential demand flexibility and how it can scale beyond the highly motivated customers that have long participated in residential demand response for over a decade. And specifically, the use of energy shift is a kind of load shifting that prioritizes user comfort. And millions of households with Nest thermostats have opted in to using energy shift to help support the grid, reduce emissions, and reduce costs. So this study provides a really robust, high confidence quantification of the energy shift resource, and it offers a really powerful tool to address grid capacity constraints. So
Interesting.
that's the high level takeaway. At their
Yeah.
core, okay, go ahead.
No, go ahead, finish that thought. At their core,
Energy shifts are this free feature that comes with the Nest thermostat, and they automatically make small adjustments to thermostat settings to prioritize cheaper and cleaner energy. And these small adjustments are really subtle and they're increasingly personalized. And so, what does that mean? Personalization means that based on whether a user interacts with their thermostat a lot and the temperatures that they like to have their household at and the weather in their local area, etc., the shift for that household is scheduled based on looking at all those characteristics and providing a shift, so a small temperature adjustment that's going to be comfortable for that user and is going to have impact.
it's based on the customer's preferences too. Isn't that right?
Yeah, and so customer preferences include settings that they can adjust in order to turn certain kinds of features on and off. But increasingly, we're using machine learning to take a look at what we believe those individual users are going to find comfortable. And this is really
Ah,
important because uh, a lot of users are not necessarily interested in deeply engaging with their energy use on a daily basis, or may not really even understand how adjusting a particular setting is going to affect their comfort. But we have, decades of experience working with customers and their thermostats and keeping people comfortable in their households. And that's really kind of the goal here of a thermostat. You get a thermostat to stay comfortable. So we really want to make shifts that both help the users save and support the grid, but do that all within a really tight comfort budget.
okay. And you mentioned earlier that these energy shifts provide flexibility for the power system, and that's a really important thing, I think. And that flexibility is demonstrated in this particular white paper based on randomized controlled trials. Now, that's not an easy thing. It's just a statistical concept. I'd like you to try and explain so we can understand what a randomized controlled trial is, how it's similar to, and maybe how it's different from pilot projects that are used to test other technologies' flexibility, And I'd like to know how these randomized control trials or RCTs validate the flexibility that this paper finds that's available from what you do control thermostats.
Right. So randomized control trials address a really common problem, which is that when you perturb a system, in this case, we run an energy shift, you want to measure what happens. Of course, that's the important. But in order to measure what happens, you need to know what would have happened had you not run the shift. And this is called having a counterfactual. So you need to know what would have happened in the absence of the shift. And the gold standard for measuring causal effects like this is to use a randomized control trial. And so, a randomized control trial is one in which you take your population and you divide it randomly into a treatment and control group.
Mhm.
And that treatment group is going to be the vast majority of your population in the case of an energy shift. And they will get the shift. And then in your control group, maybe 1% of the population does not get a shift at all. And this is really great because it provides a completely unbiased estimate of what would have happened in the absence of your energy shift.
Ah, I see. So that small group, they do what would have happened in the absence of the shift.
That's right. And so you're just comparing the average performance of the treatment group to the average performance of the control group, and you get this really nice measure of what would have happened. And when you compare an RCT to common baselines that are used in um, demand flexibility, they're typically historical baselines that look at what happened in the previous days, and you take the average of previous day performance. And one problem is that as the weather changes and other factors change, you end up in a spot where what happened yesterday is not a good predictor of what would have happened today. And we've built a whole bunch of statistical techniques using same day adjustments and averaging different kinds of days together to correct for that, but you still end up with quite a bit of bias with those traditional baselines. And so we can use RCTs because we have these really large populations and homes look similar to one another. If you were trying to do demand flexibility with a aluminum smelter, you can't do an RCT of a bunch with you have some holdout because you don't have a bunch of plants, but we have millions of homes. And so
We
you can
meaning,
use an RCT really effectively.
excuse me, Stephen, forgive me for interrupting. We meaning Renew Home has, you have like 5 million homes or thermostats signed up, right? And that's what you mean when you say we, is that correct?
Yeah, so Renew Home, over 5 million homes have opted into Energy Shift. And so, because there is such a large population, even in any particular local grid area, you can provide a reasonable control group that provides good statistical performance.
Oh, I see. And now I know a lot of utilities that I've written about, they have a pilot project. They structure the pilot project, they go to their regulators, they say, we want to try this flexibility with smart thermostats, smart devices, solar plus storage, whatever. And they run that for a year or something. How does this randomized control trial improve on that? I guess it goes faster. You take a segment of time, relatively small segment of time. Am I correct? I don't know, um, but it's done pretty quickly, isn't it? Which is would be a great advance over pilots. But is it as accurate?
So RCTs are actually commonly used in all kinds of studies to evaluate effects. And so you will see them in evaluations of lots of demand response and other demand flexibility programs, but they're
Mm,
typically not used for measuring the performance of any individual shift because of the problems I mentioned associated with the treatment and control
right.
group size. One thing that people are really interested in is seeing the maximum impact of the shift that they're going to run at any given time because, of course, they're using that resource in order to provide some reliability service or to reduce system cost. And this is difficult typically when you have, 1,000 batteries enrolled in a program. It's hard to withhold a significant number of those batteries, for example, to have a control group. So it works really well in our case. So I would say that it is just using sort of the best in class evaluation technology, and it does provide a really nice way to evaluate performance. But we're not certainly the first people to use RCTs, but they are, in my opinion, the most accurate way to measure the performance of a system like a really large residential demand flexibility program.
And that's really important because, I mean, the conversation in the energy world is all about flexibility these days. It's becoming more and more important, whether it's data center flexibility or the ability of a system to be flexible in response to surprising peaks and things like that. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's absolutely right.
Okay. I in reading the paper, I came across a statement. I'd like you to just clarify exactly what it means. It's one of the key conclusions in the paper. It, it said that there's an aggregate peak day load reduction potential, it found, of 3.96 gigawatts from the 5.2 million thermostats in the 4.1 million homes that I guess that Renew Home has that met the criteria. I think that's to some extent a statistical estimate, but I guess you're saying that it meets the accuracy potential of randomized controlled trials. What do you mean by the met the criteria? What are the criteria? I know the paper explains it a little bit, but I got a little confused about how it applies to this aggregate peak day load reduction potential. So help me understand this a little better, Stephen.
Well, that it is a bit of a doozy of a sentence, so I can appreciate how it might be a little confusing. Um, so I can start by saying that all of the estimates in the paper are based on randomized control trials, and so I think that's a really important part of the paper is just using that really high level of statistical rigor. But one thing that's important to note is that the time of the peak depends on where you are in the country, and we have, multiple time zones and whatnot. And so you wouldn't really necessarily be running the same exact time in UTC time in New York that you might be running in California. And
Mm,
so we don't necessarily have the exact same potential at exactly the same moment in time. And so, what this is talking about is if you look at the capacity across the country and you looked and you said, let's say hypothetically we were, in a spot where that peak existed at exactly the same time, and it was also a peak day across the entire country, that resource would be about 4 gigawatts across those homes.
mm,
And so that's really what it's talking about. It's the aggregate of that resource across the country. Not that you could necessarily truly deploy it all at once, because of course you're not kind of approaching the design temperature in every city in the country at exactly the same time. But I kind of want to reflect a little bit on like why is that number so important, and like why is 4 gigawatts of capacity kind of an interesting thing? And it's because at this particular time, we're looking at increasing costs, and it's really kind of widely covered in the media right now that residential electricity rates are increasing, and there's a lot of discussion about how increasing demand is driving an increased need for capacity and that bringing new capacity online is really expensive and time consuming. And using demand flexibility is a really interesting way to look at providing capacity to the grid. It has no emissions. It's a relatively low cost resource. And 4 gigawatts is about 40 gas peaker plants of capacity.
mm,
So there's really quite a bit of capacity available here. And one of the nice things about this is that because customers are volunteering to participate in a program like this, it's a great opportunity for customers to be rewarded for their participation. So some of that cost savings that the grid is experiencing associated with using this kind of a flexible resource can be passed back to users, which is a really great thing, especially in a time of increasing costs. And that's a really important part of what we're interested in at Renew Home is making sure that the customers are first. And so that comes down to comfort, but it also comes down to making sure that the benefits to the grid in terms of cost savings are shared back with the users so that they can get those rewards.
Interesting. And that's particularly just because the customers are the ones that are paying for those smart thermostats in many cases, right? And smart devices, right?
Yeah, customers generally are buying thermostats because they want, the ability to have an app to control their device, some of the learning features. The Nest thermostats are really beautiful, so having them just on the wall is a nice thing. And, they're opting in to help the grid and to reduce emissions and reduce costs. And so it's great that they're volunteering to do that. And we just want to make sure that all those benefits that they're providing are shared back with them.
If you want to hear the big last exchange of this terrific conversation, support the podcast by subscribing at just $2.99 per month to the Power Sector Podcast's Power More. With your subscription, you'll get both parts of the content delivered directly to you the second they drop.